Hello and welcome to Tech TV. Today we're going to be talking about the new Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, which has been introduced in the UK in the last 24 hours and has had its first reading in Parliament. Highlights of the bill, including the fact that it has had an extension in the terms of the definition of what qualifies as critical national infrastructure, so that this now includes a whole host of other organisations, not just the big cloud and infrastructure companies, but also MSPs and a large number of companies within the ecosystem that provide support for these companies. So addressing what one P would possibly refer to as the supply chain dimension. Now, there's an interesting extra dimension here that we'll come on to talk about in terms of enforcement and penalties and some of the powers that have been granted in terms of regulation. But I'm going to turn over to Pete to see what Pete's first thoughts are on this before we introduce our guests.
Well, I actually think it's fascinating, long overdue, incredibly overdue. It's absolutely imperative that cybersecurity should have been taken much, much more seriously. I wrote a book in 2005 suggesting that we were in a terribly parlous state, so we're a long way off that. I think the thing I find most interesting is, I suppose, what you could call the Henry VIII dimension in all of this, because regulations can be introduced to legislation. That means that what we're introducing is something that's equivalent to the cyber posture that the insurance industry is very, very keen on. And that's something that really we needed to get into the heads of British business. This isn't a question of just ticking a few boxes. This is about being aware of what the situation is and responding to it.
And our first guest here today, representing the CSBR, which is a think tank that is somewhat focused on this particular issue, obviously, by the denotation of its name. We have James Morris. Now, James, thank you very much for joining us.
No problem.
Would you say a few words, please, just introducing to everyone who the CSBR are?
Yeah, so we're a policy centre dedicated to cybersecurity and business resilience, looking at that important interrelationship between cybersecurity and resilience. To come up with policy ideas and evidence-based research about what works from a policy point of view, and really looking at how we can address the changing nature of the threat landscape that we currently face.
Thank you very much. And our next guest, Pete, if you'd like to introduce Carolyn.
Well, Carolyn Harrison of Assured Clarity, this is the area that you're involved in, isn't it? Cyber resilience, you think that's basically where the world is going to go, isn't it?
Absolutely, yes. Thank you for inviting me. And yes, I feel equally passionate, like I think most people on this session, in terms of it is about time we did something about it. We operate in a consultancy capacity with some tech behind us, and if we were getting it right, then we wouldn't be having the breaches that we see almost daily in the media. And some of it doesn't even get declared. There's a lot behind closed doors that people just literally push under the carpet.
And that's one of the really interesting things, isn't it, James? Why now? Why is this sudden, for as I've said, for years and years and years, people haven't really seemed to take this very seriously. Why now?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, the gestation of this bill has actually been, probably over the last 4 or 5 years. I remember the previous government, beginning to sort of look at it. But I suppose, given the nature of the threat landscape that we've seen over the last year, the last 2 years, that there's a real imperative here to address that issue. And this bill is designed to try and get some structure around regulation. And Yeah, no, it's an interesting. What's landed is very interesting. I mean, we did an assessment of the policy statement which came out in April, and looking at the draft, looking at the bill that was published yesterday. I don't think there's anything particularly surprising in it, but it's interesting that you refer to the sort of Henry VIII powers that are contained within this bill, and it's a bit of a double-edged sword because you take Section 3 of the bill, which is a fairly substantial section, that's all about what powers are going to be given to the Secretary of State to determine things like the setting of strategic priorities for all the sectoral regulators. It gives, I mean, Henry VIII powers, as in, the Secretary of State can change the regulations without necessarily parliamentary scrutiny for national security reasons and for any other reason. So actually, there is a very large section of this bill which is accreting a lot of power to the Secretary of State as a kind of overarching regulator. Now, I totally understand that governments need to be in a position to be able to respond to changing threats to national security and changing technology. We're in a very, very fast-moving environment. But one of the concerns which I'll be raising is that when we give these kind of powers to the Secretary of State, there does need to be proper accountability and scrutiny of what those powers are. And when changes are made, there does need to be mechanisms of accountability. Because my concern with the bill overall, I suppose, is that it is quite a centralizing piece of legislation, accreting a lot of power into the hands of the government, for partly for understandable reasons. But we do need to be very careful that we look in detail at, what is being proposed in that section of the bill.
But James, don't we need that? Because I've interviewed people for the past 4 years or so, and they say that we're at war. I met somebody in Panama from the State Department who said, yes, we're at war because there is this continuous onslaught, whether it be from cyber criminal gangs, nation states, and
Yeah.
also, organizations that are basically involved with cybercrime and nation states.
Well, no, I think that does go to the heart of it. So I totally understand, as I said, that in a situation where there is threats to national security and that things need to be addressed very quickly, there is a very strong argument to say that you do need to give the Secretary of State more power. But there's other sections which are about the interrelationship between the Secretary of State and the regulators. And so the Secretary of State is playing a role of making sure that there are strategic priorities set across the piece so we don't get fragmentation. Now, I understand that, but I suppose what I'm also looking for is making sure that business that is going to be impacted by these regulations is also, part of the consultation process, that it's not just something which is being imposed from above. Because the danger of that is that we're going to expect the legislation to solve all of our problems. Now, I was a parliamentarian for 14 years, and I was involved in a lot of bills. And the thing about cybersecurity and resilience is, and this is, I think, a fundamental sort of philosophical point, is we cannot expect legislation on its own to solve all our problems. It may be able to harden our regulatory regime. As you say, we are sort of in a state of war, so we need to be mindful of that. But we're not going to make fundamental progress unless we have a whole of society commitment to cybersecurity and resilience. And therefore, that I just worry that that there's a lot of centralization in this bill, and we need to make sure that as it begins to progress through Parliament, that there is scrutiny, that we understand, in more detail what is being proposed, ask the right questions to make sure that we do get some bottom-up engagement in the various powers which are being apportioned.
Well, Carolyn, sorry. How about that? Do you think that business will be able to enter into this? Do you think that they will enjoy this, or will they see this as
They're
even
not
more
going to enjoy
bureaucracy?
it. They're not going to enjoy it based on my many years of experience. We've struggled as a nation. We're not alone, but we've struggled as a nation to get businesses, particularly small businesses, to just do basic cyber hygiene. Cyber Essentials was brought in to try and encourage people to, do some practical steps, to harden themselves. And that was only brought in because people couldn't be bothered to do the likes of ISO 27001, a standard that was for information security. So, I mean, there has been a lot of success with the likes of Cyber Essentials, but for most people, it's a box ticking exercise. They don't understand what they're doing. They know not what they do. And just a point on the different sectors, I agree with you, James, that and you, Pete, that we've got a bit of a dichotomy there in terms of, yes, we need to allow the relevant sectors to be involved and put practical things in place. And as I understand it, the individual regulator for each sector is going to be open to interpreting some of this. But equally, education, I've said it for don't know how many years, unless you educate people as to what they're doing, why they're doing it, then you've got the other half, which is, well, you're going to have enforcement. I mean, look at GDPR, data protection. It was seen as being toothless, really. So the ICO is going to be looking after the MSPs, as we understand it, and we've contacted them and they don't have a plan yet. So yes, there's a lot up in the air, and I think I agree with you, James. We need to be able to have a seat at the table. We need to be able to advise. And just a quick one, MSPs have never been seen as somebody that delivers security. They do IT. And there's a big difference between infrastructure, IT, delivering the backbone, and a bit like software development. They've not been trained in security. There's no security by design or privacy by design.
Yeah, but how about this issue of mandatory breach reporting? We've needed that forever. I had arguments in 1989 about mandatory breach reporting. Yeah, I was yanked into the Cabinet Office because they were talking about cyber insurance. The cyber insurers cannot actually insure you unless they know what the picture is. How can you say we're going to give you insurance if you don't know how many attacks there are? So surely that's a good thing. Carolyn.
It's absolutely a good thing. And I, I'm going back many years, approached the insurance sector to say, would you not incentivize businesses and give a reduced premium if they did certain things? And I didn't want to know. But so it's really refreshing to know that now we're actually, they are getting involved, and they I think have probably got the most power to actually deliver this. So there's I'm hearing of largish organizations that they're saying you're not fit for purpose, and therefore your insurance is going to be invalid. So I think that will probably have the strongest message, particularly for SMEs. Yeah, I don't know if you agree, James. I think that will resonate because they're not insured. So,
well, James, I mean, that's a good point, isn't it? Because one of the things we're meant to be in this AI age, people are talking about supply chains. One of the things that if you want to be in an AI age, you want to have efficiency, you want to be able to see through your supply chains, yet you don't want the vulnerability of being connected to people who may not have adequate cybersecurity.
No, I think absolutely. I mean, I welcome those provisions in the bill around managed service providers. You look at some of the high-profile attacks that we've seen over the last sort of year and a half, that probably, not pointing fingers at anyone, but probably some of the vulnerabilities were coming from MSPs, IT outsource companies, which had particular vulnerabilities. So I think that's absolutely the right direction to go, and similarly with bringing data centers into the definition of critical national infrastructure and all of that, I think that is to be welcomed. Picking up on Carolyn's point, the complexity that I see, or potential complexity, is again, you're looking at a new regulatory role for which I think in the bill they refer to the information commission, which I think they might be proposing a change of name of the ICO. But as Carolyn said, I don't think that currently the Information Commission or the ICO is sufficiently resourced to take on all the responsibilities that they're going to be expected to do. If you look in the bill, there is lots of references to the Information Commission playing a role in sort of designation, in certification, in the mandatory reporting regime, and so on and so forth. Now, it might be the right place to locate it. That might be fine. I think it raises some issues about the resourcing of that particular organisation to do all of these things, because as you say, mandatory reporting, and again with this bill, we're also talking about the reporting of breaches which haven't necessarily led to a kind of devastating collapse of a system. First of all, you have the insurance issue, which you've highlighted, but then you also have the issue which we need it to be meaningful intelligence, which can be used in order for us to understand the threat landscape on a day-to-day basis through the National Cybersecurity Centre, the intelligence services, and so on. What I want to understand a little bit more about as we get into the debate on the bill is about how all of those interrelationships between the regulators, the new Information Commission, the National Cybersecurity Centre, to make sure that we don't sort of inadvertently create some kind of labyrinthine system. It needs to be simple, understood, well-resourced in order to achieve the kind of hardening objective that we want. But I just have a few, the concern is that we create a labyrinth of different people overseeing different bits and pieces without it being coherent.
But surely, in a sense, we do need some centralisation. I mean, there is a real feeling that this isn't 11th hour. This is an hour after midnight. People are scrabbling around at the moment. I can remember, again, back in 1989, the Information Commissioner's Office was called the Data Protection Registrar because Margaret Thatcher hated the institution and she wanted to make it as meaningless as possible. Now we're in the 21st century. We need to actually develop 20th century infrastructure and 20th century regulation very fast now.
No, I mean, I totally agree with that. It's just about capacity and whether we make sure that the kind of lines of responsibility here are really clear about who's doing what responsibilities they have, and how it all fits together. I say to us, my first reading of the bill yesterday afternoon, picking up the number of times the Information Commission was being cited in clauses means that that's going to be pretty fundamental. So we need to get a clear understanding of how that organisation is going to be sort of repurposed and resourced to do this jobs properly, because it can't do it as a kind of sideline of something else. As you say, this is an important moment in the hardening of our approach, and we need to get it right.
Carolyn, we put out a programme last month where we've been told that now top executives, business executives, are going to be targeted by cyber criminals. They're going to use AI to target them. And we were also told that there's going to be an absolute tsunami of attacks from Southeast Asian scamming gangs who are going to be using AI, and that they're actually after those sorts of credentials. But that seems to be outside the remit of what we're talking about. I mean, this is an incredible world that we're now addressing, isn't it? This is business legislation, but then there is criminality that's coming in and outside of that. I mean, would those attacks by scamming gangs be seen as breaches?
Well, in theory, yes, they should be. The chief executive level or the C-suite level has been the Achilles heel of lots of organizations for quite a long time, because there is a little bit of blaseness, I think, I find that the people that click on the spam links and what have you can be the directors, the chief executive. So they've been a big target for quite a while. And when you get access to somebody like the chief executive's account, you can move money, you can do things. So the upside of the rewards are great. So they'll spend an awful long time trying to get to the right person. But yeah, will the ICO as was and the Information Commission going forward, will it have the teeth to insist and ensure that people take it as seriously as the rest of us. So not sure.
But there, again, Carolyn, there's another issue here, isn't there? Which is traditionally the cybersecurity department has been seen as a block to actually achieving things, and people have always tried to find ways around cybersecurity protocols. Chief executives, would they like to actually report that they'd been scammed? There is a big problem, and we see this in cybersecurity quite a lot, where people are actually enjoined to actually say, look, I was stupid. Nobody likes saying that they were stupid.
This is where your education comes in, Pete, because the thing is, you can put all the frameworks, the new CAF framework and all of these things, so that cyber assessment framework that a lot of this stuff will be sitting on, and it'll be open to interpretation, like we were saying, for depending on whether somebody's got a low profile or a high risk profile as to how many of the controls. But if you I think education and explaining to the world at large what these implications are, they just think they have no responsibility. You think about when we brought in online banking and they pushed the devices at us to authenticate ourselves, but that didn't take the responsibility and liability away from the banks, because they were pushing it, were pushed on us, and we were like, well, it's your fault, you lost it. And lots of times they would like reimburse us, but there is a sea change, and we're trying to say, you've got to take some ownership, you've got to understand that you've got a part to play. But I don't know if a lot of Joe public really believes that they have a responsibility. I don't know what you think, but
let's take that point. I had a sort of a marginal run-in with the National Crime Agency when they said that they were introducing this legislation about cyber, and I'd said, well, what does that mean for the man on the street? Where do they go and report it? And they hadn't actually thought about that. So, James, are we taking cybersecurity seriously? So many people, so many small businesses say, well, no one would be interested in me.
Yeah, well, I think that's again, this come back to this fundamental point, which is in order to change behavior, you do need to have a transparency, and you need to have clarity of accountability and responsibility. I think that's absolutely the case. But the broader point is that we still have as you're describing, as Carolyn was saying, that we have a big job of work to do in order to engage ordinary people, if that's the right way of describing it, citizens, small business people, people who don't necessarily think they're in the front line, to engage with this process and be part of this process. So, this bill, which we're talking about today, was first announced in July 2024. Now, since it was announced, we've had a whole series of very high-profile attacks on large businesses which people recognise, and it's been on the BBC website as a kind of top story. Now, that might be having an effect of beginning to change perceptions among the broader swathe of society. Hold it a moment, something quite fundamental is happening here. And the only way we're going to make this legislation successful is to implement the legislation in tandem with this broader effort of engagement, which says, we've got major issues here with bad guys, state actors and others, and links to criminality, trying to unpick our critical national infrastructure and our economic resilience. And we need to understand that this is a kind of this is an existential threat to the national security of the country, and we haven't really begun to have that debate. And that's why I was encouraged actually when they published the press notice around the Cybersecurity and Resilience Bill, that they were much clearer about setting it in the context of national security than they had been even when they started talking about the bill 15 months ago. And I think that's been the impact of these high-profile attacks and the changing nature of the debate around the issue.
I mean, it's refreshing to see this redefinition of infrastructure, isn't it? There used to be the time when I rang up GCHQ, they would say, why are you ringing us? Don't you know what the GC stands for in GCHQ? Now,
Yes.
we're actually broadening that, because the infrastructure is the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you look at, if you look at I mean, even today, you can see there was the GDP figures came out, and there was an estimation that they were depressed because of the result of the JLR cyber attack, because car production was down, et cetera, et cetera. And there was some estimation made in a report which the government published alongside the bill about the impact on the economy and the impact on GDP growth of cyber attacks. So again, that's a useful link. The link to national security, the link to economic resilience, which is not something, which is not something which has been fully and properly articulated, and communicating that out as we go through the process of making sure that we have transparency and clarity in the legislation itself. The two need to go in hand, or we may find ourselves, it takes a long time to get a bill through Parliament. It will probably take, north of 18 months to get this bill on the statute book, by which time technology would have changed, and we might find it's out of date before we've even got there.
Just as well we have those Henry VIII powers, and of course a Jaguar Land Rover thing must mean quite a lot to you, because it's your former constituency, isn't it?
Well, it's very close by. Yeah, I mean, people I was the MP for Hales Owen and Raleigh Regis, so the supply chain there kind of extended out from Solihull into various other parts of the West Midlands. And so the fact that JLR had been subject has sort of changed the nature of the debate, and changed the nature of people's perceptions about what's going on.
Obviously, the Jaguar Land Rover attack was something that has been in all the headlines and had a big impact on the economy. But when we're talking about educational awareness, you can hardly say that a big organisation like Jaguar Land Rover with a CISO weren't aware of the threats. And even if we impose large fines, they're going to pale into insignificance compared with the damage done to Land Rover by the actual attack itself. So are we really going to change attitudes with these sort of penalties when it should be very obvious to the big organisations out there exactly the size of the threat anyway? What difference is this going to make? And do we have any confidence that this using a stick rather than a carrot approach is actually going to be effective?
Well, I don't know whether, and it's an interesting point. I mean, the evidence around whether fines and so on are going to make a difference. I think again it does point to this point about transparency and clarity. But as you say, it also speaks to a changed kind of behavioural culture at the level of the boardroom, that that we're still in a position where lots of large organizations haven't got a transparent view about the risks they face, the interrelationships and so on and so forth. And so with this legislation, it kind of enables certain things to happen, and it needs to go in combination with a kind of changed behavioural culture at the boardroom level, that in understanding day-to-day risk in the business and understanding the kind of strategic implications of that at the boardroom level. So I think it's a combination of carrot and stick. Transparency and clarity helps us, and then we need this behaviour to continue to see this kind of behavioural change, in that cybersecurity and resilience is not just some kind of sideline; it's fundamental to the operations of businesses. It's not just something that's covered by the IT department. It's something which is absolutely fundamental strategic importance to the chief executive, the chairman, and whoever else, so that companies are kind of harden their protections.
Yeah, but you talk about the board level and the attitudes at board. Up until now, possibly the most critical skill required on board is some sort of financial literacy, because that's largely how boardroom responsibility is seen. Surely we need to be introducing a mandate around technological literacy at some extent on boards,
Very much so.
and we didn't actually see a change in behaviour in areas like financial fraud or in health and safety when initial fines were introduced. It was only once fines were actually made directly applicable to individual directors rather than to the company itself that we actually saw a change in attitudes there at board level towards financial crime and financial fraud, and also to health and safety. So are we missing a trick here? Are we using a stick in the wrong direction?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not. I think that the fine elements which are described in the bill, that they're a start, and as you say, the sort of the most important thing is that whatever this bill is attempting to do, that it provides a catalyst for behavioural change, that we get cybersecurity and resilience, at the front and center of the boardroom, that there's an understanding of the risks, and there's an understanding of the potential, the potential reputational damage, the financial damage, and the damage to the supply chain, and that we understand how we're going to deal with that and mitigate it.
James, there's also a big concern here that too much in the way of a stick approach may be effective in changing attitudes, but it could have a deleterious effect if we end up creating a chief incident scapegoat officer. If that's what the CISO becomes, we don't want to treat the CISO as a scapegoat. It needs to be something where any fines are effective, they change attitudes, they change behaviour, but they don't make it an impossible task for the CISO.
Well, that's the point I was making earlier about that section of the bill that we were discussing, where there are a lot of powers, especially around directing regulators, that are in the hands of the Secretary of State. And it talks about, putting duties on the Secretary of State to consult with the regulators to make sure that they're happy. But what I want to see is making sure that business is engaged at that point, so that all layers in this effort are interrelated, that we don't get a gap opening up between the regulatory regime and those people who are grappling with the strategic issues in companies, and that they feel as though somehow there's some kind of remote process which they don't have any agency in. That's the danger that I can see if we don't get all of the layers of this legislation and how it's actually going to be operationalized right.
Okay, well, Caroline, you see that.
Yes.
What's your take on it? You're very close to these people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that as we were just saying earlier, that who ultimately in an organisation is going to be responsible for the cyber resilience and the protection of it? Is it the C-suite? Is it the chief exec, or is it the CISO? My research out in the marketplace is that many people don't want to be a CISO anymore because they just feel that they don't have the power, but they're being held accountable and responsible. So I think there is a job to be done, and whether the bill can address this, probably not. But it's this back to the education and saying, well, this is more than one person's role. As I think James was saying earlier, this is the whole organisation's role. And if you're in manufacturing, like Land Rover Jaguar, who's responsible for where you go between IT and OT? I mean, who's got that? And I think what happens is it falls in big chasms of gaps between departments. The biggest I find with the organisations we deal with is internal communications and accountability, responsibility, finger pointing. Well, that's not our responsibility. But if we deal with an organisation, say, and we're looking at cyber, we're looking at PCI, which is the framework for taking payments, and data protection, There might be three completely different departments and they don't talk to each other. And what's the difference? They're all the same. They're all about protection, aren't they?
Okay, well, that was the point that I think James was making earlier. I think that there's a lot to chew over. We do seem to be papering over the cracks at the moment, but at least we're doing that.
Well, guys, I think an enormously interesting debate, and we're very grateful to our guests for joining us and sharing us with some of their thoughts. It's only obviously the first reading in Parliament. We still have a long way to go here, and possibly we're looking about 18 months' time potentially before this becomes law, and there's going to be plenty of time for a lot of lobbying and a lot of input. So it'll be very interesting to follow this as it develops, and we look forward to having you guys back potentially to share further thoughts as things unfold. Thank you all very much, and hopefully we will have a situation here where we have legislation that, once it is finally on the statute book, is refined to an extent that it really does change the attitudes and behaviours in the way that we really need. Thank you very much.
Thank you.